Now, if you guys don't know, my favorite movie of 2014 was Whiplash. I know that in my top favorite movies of 2014 video, my favorite was Foxcatcher, but since then my opinion has changed. And I just keep thinking about this movie pretty much every single day. And I'm going to give you guys a video about why I love this movie, and one of the biggest things why I love this movie, of course, is the ending. Now, inspired by Chris Stuckman and many, many other YouTube critics who make videos like this, I'm going to explain to you everything about Whiplash. Since I'm going to be talking a lot of scenes from the film, of course, if you have not seen this movie, do not watch this video because, well, spoiler alert. Now, Whiplash follows the character of Andrew Neiman, who is played brilliantly by Miles Teller. He wants to be one of the greatest jazz drummers of all time, and he is at the greatest music school in the entire country called Schaefer, and he's trying to get the attention of the teacher named Terrence Fletcher, played by J.K. Simmons. Now, Terrence Fletcher is probably, in my opinion, one of the greatest antagonists in movie history. He is such an amazing character, and he's such a brilliant asshole, and he is bringing every single bit of intimidation to Andrew. And finally, he gets into Fletcher's class and is finally able to show him what he has. But what that he doesn't realize from the beginning is that Fletcher is one of the most hardest teachers that any student could ever have. On Andrew's first day, Fletcher completely shouts at a kid and kicks him out of the class for being out of tune, when Fletcher even knew that it wasn't even him who was out of tune, he just wanted him out of the classroom. Wow, what a dick. Then the next scene, Fletcher acts completely nice to Andrew and even lets him tell Mr. Fletcher about parts of his personal life, and just tells him that, hey kid, you're gonna do a good job, you know, all that stuff. And then literally right in the next scene, you think he's gonna be all fine, Fletcher's gonna be okay with him not being the perfect student at first, but no. Fletcher makes Andrew play the same thing over and over again, hurls a chair at his head, slaps him across the face a couple of times, and of course, yells at the top of his lungs as much as he possibly can, which brings to Andrew in tears, and leads to the whole psychological mind games between Fletcher and Andrew throughout the rest of the entire movie. This leads to Andrew practicing and practicing as much as he possibly can, and he does a good job of it, but he keeps getting more and more mind games from Fletcher, and he has to keep practicing more and practicing more, and that's all he will focus on, when he even has to break up with his own girlfriend to get more time for drums, because he cannot spend as much time with her because, well, she is a distraction. It then doesn't help when a friend of Andrew's from his lower band class gets invited to the class by Fletcher and is then chosen as the big top drummer of the class when it is no longer. And of course, Fletcher knows that this is going to get Andrew extremely pissed off, which Fletcher even admits near the end of the movie that Fletcher only put Connolly into that class to boost up Andrew's playing, which of course it does, which leads to him getting the lead part in the new number called Caravan, which unfortunately he gets kicked out of the number because he cannot make it on time. Andrew then rushes to get to this concert and be able to play this number, but unfortunately it gets Andrew into a bad car crash because he's not knowing where he is going, and he runs over to the place after his car gets run over. He can't play because he is so injured, and so Fletcher kicks him out of the band, and Andrew runs and tackles him to the ground, nearly wanting to choke him, and yells, "Fuck you, Fletcher, fuck you." Andrew then leaves Schaefer, and the next scene follows a meeting with him, his dad, and a lawyer who is telling about another former student of Fletcher's named Sean Casey, who unfortunately had committed suicide from anxiety and depression, which her mother claims had happened after he was Fletcher's student. Fletcher does mention Sean Casey's passing to the class earlier on in the film, but what he didn't say was how he died. Fletcher said that he died in a car accident when really he had hung himself. And Fletcher, of course, feels guilt from it, but he can't tell it to the whole class. And while he's telling the story about Sean Casey, it even leads to Fletcher crying in the scene. And the lawyer convinces Andrew to admit that Fletcher did cause Andrew emotional stress so he can get kicked out of Schaefer. Months later, Andrew bumps into Fletcher at a jazz club, which mentions that he did get fired from Schaefer, and he told Andrew that the meaning of his teaching was to push people beyond what's expected of them. Listen to this clip from the movie.
I told you that story about how Charlie Parker became Charlie Parker, right?
Yeah, Joe Jones threw a cymbal at his head.
Exactly. Parker's a young kid, pretty good on the sax, gets up to play at a cutting session, and Jones nearly decapitates him for it. And he's laughed off stage. Cries himself to sleep that night, but the next morning, what does he do? He practices. And he practices, and he practices with one goal in mind: never to be laughed at again. And a year later, he goes back to the Reno, and he steps up on that stage and he plays the best solo the world has ever heard. So imagine if Jones had just said, well, that's okay, Charlie. That was all right. Good job. And Charlie thinks to himself, I did do a pretty good job. End of story. No bird. That to me is an absolute tragedy. But that's just what the world wants now. People wonder why jazz is dying. I'll tell you, man, and every Starbucks jazz album just proves my point, really. There are no two words in the English language more harmful than good job.
Hiding from Fletcher's rugged exterior, all he really wanted to find was the next Charlie Parker, so he could have said, yes, I taught that kid. And you really did see something in Andrew, and they actually did have quite a few similarities. The reason why Charlie Parker became Charlie Parker was because, well, Joe Jones threw a cymbal at his head, and it made him really upset, and he kept practicing and practicing and practicing. And from the insults that he was getting from other kids before he entered Fletcher's class, and Fletcher just yelling at him constantly, would make Andrew practice even harder. To the point where he goes absolutely nuts, punches a hole in his drum set, his hands become completely bloody, including a scene where he digs his hand in an ice jug of water when in 5 seconds it looks like a whole jug of fruit punch. Andrew then thinks a little bit differently about Fletcher and even agrees to play for one of Fletcher's new gigs at Carnegie Hall, when unfortunately Fletcher completely set Andrew up because he knew that it was Andrew who had turned him in, so he completely embarrasses him by telling Andrew that they were going to play Caravan and Whiplash, the stuff he's usually used to playing in his classroom, but instead they're playing a complete different set of music that Andrew has no clue how to play, and he doesn't even have the notes for it. So, Andrew is humiliated. Andrew walks off stage, gives a hug to his father, and it seems like he's going to give up music forever. But he walks back on stage and puts on one. Now, this whole scene lasted about 9 minutes, and my God, was it incredible. Andrew plays one of the best solos that probably the audience could have ever heard. And, to his surprise, that is exactly what Fletcher wanted to happen. Of course, he didn't know that Andrew would step back on stage. But that's what he was hoping, because it is exactly what Charlie Parker did. He got embarrassed, then he went back on stage, and gave an incredible solo and became extremely famous. It even shows Andrew and Fletcher actually working together to end the number Caravan, which was absolutely incredible. And in the end, they both got what they wanted. Andrew got to fulfill his music career, and Fletcher finally got his Charlie Parker. Now, the question is, did Fletcher take it a little bit too far to finally find his Charlie Parker? And the answer is absolutely. Fletcher definitely should not have gone extremely far to the level where people are calling it like a Full Metal Jacket for music movies. But if he hadn't pushed him to the level that he did, maybe Andrew would have never gotten this good. And that's why Fletcher would never be sorry for anything that he would do to a student. So, Fletcher, after your whole fucked up plans, you finally got what you wanted. Which, after all that trouble, at the end they get to deliver a smile to one another, which I thought was the most brilliant way to end the movie, and I really don't think it could have ended off any better. So the best part about this movie, of course, was the mind games and the whole chemistry that Miles Teller and J.K. Simmons had, portraying the characters of Andrew Neiman and Terrence Fletcher. These two worked absolutely perfect together, and watching those two on screen together would bring me goosebumps and have me on the edge of my seat. And nothing like any other movie did to me in this year or in many years. And that is why Whiplash was my favorite movie of 2014 and is one of my favorite movies of all time. So thank you guys for watching. I know it was extremely long, but I really hope you enjoyed it. And I'm Lucas Stringer. I'll see you guys later.